Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he sorted through the massive pile of scrap metal that had arrived at Salvage Station Gamma, the orbital facility processed debris from across 3 star systems. And today's haul was particularly strange. Among the twisted hull fragments and fried circuitry, something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was just another piece of exotic alloy. The crystalline structure gleamed with an inner light about the size of a small refrigerator. But as Marcus moved closer, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. The crystal wasn't solid, there was something inside. "What the hell?" he muttered, clearing away the surrounding debris. The crystal was actually some kind of stasis pod, and through the translucent surface, he could see a creature unlike anything in the known galaxy databases. The being inside looked reptilian, with scales that shimmered between deep blue and silver. It had 4 legs, tiny wings folded against its back, and a long tail curled around its body. Most striking were the elegant horns sprouting from its head and the peaceful expression on its face. As if it were simply sleeping, Marcus had been working salvage for 15 years. Ever since Earth joined the Galactic Trade Consortium, he'd seen technology from dozens of species, but nothing like this. The pod's energy readings were almost 0, suggesting whatever was inside had been frozen for a very long time. His supervisor, Kayla Rodriguez, walked over carrying her scanner. "Find something interesting in today's junk pile?" "You could say that." Marcus gestured to the crystal pod. "Take a look at this." Kayla's scanner beeped frantically as she ran it over the surface. "These energy signatures. Marcus, this isn't from any known civilization? The quantum resonance patterns are completely unique. Should we report it to the consortium?" Kayla was quiet for a moment, studying the readings. "The pod's failing. Whatever preservation system is keeping that creature alive, it's got maybe 6 hours of power left." Marcus looked at the peaceful face of the creature inside. Something about it reminded him of the stray cats he used to rescue as a kid back on Earth. "Can we open it?" "The release mechanism is simple enough, but Marcus... We don't know what that thing is. It could be dangerous." "Look at it," Marcus said softly. "It's just a baby. And it's dying." Kayla sighed. She'd known Marcus long enough to recognize that stubborn expression. "If you're going to do something stupid, at least let me help." They worked together to activate the pod's release sequence. Ancient mechanisms hummed to life, and the crystal began to split open with a sound like breaking ice. Mist poured out as the temperature equalized, and the small creature stirred. Its eyes opened brilliant golden orbs that seemed to hold intelligence far beyond what Marcus expected. The creature looked around with obvious confusion, then focused on Marcus's face. It made a soft chirping sound, almost like a question. "Hey there, little guy," Marcus said gently, extending his hand. "You're safe now." The creature sniffed his fingers, then nuzzled against his palm with surprising warmth. Its scales were softer than they looked, and Marcus could feel a faint vibration, almost like purring. "It likes you," Kayla observed. "But Marcus, we need to figure out what species this is. The consortium has protocols for first contact situations." Before Marcus could respond, his tablet chimed with an urgent message. 3 massive ships had just dropped out of hyperspace near the station. Ships with energy signatures that perfectly matched the creature's pod. "Uh-oh," Kayla muttered, reading over his shoulder. "Looks like someone's looking for your new friend." The station's communication array crackled to life. The voice that emerged spoke in perfect galactic standard, but with a tone that suggested barely contained rage. "Attention salvage facility. You are harboring stolen property of the Dragon clans. Return the hatchling immediately or face the consequences of your interference." Marcus looked down at the small creature, which had curled up in his arms and was making contented chirping sounds. "Dragon clans? This little guy is a dragon?" "Apparently," Kayla said, her voice tight with worry. "And they want him back." "Negative," Marcus found himself saying into the com. "This hatchling was abandoned in a failing stasis pod. We saved its life." The silence that followed was ominous. When the voice returned, it was even colder. "Human, you do not understand what you have interfered with. That hatchling is property of the Crimson Wing clan. Your species knows nothing of dragons. The creature in Marcus's arms made a soft growling sound, as if it understood the conversation and didn't like what it was hearing. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Maybe we don't know about dragons, he said, but we know about taking care of things that need help. This little one stays with me until I'm convinced you'll treat him right. The communication channel went dead. Through the station's windows, Marcus could see the dragon ships moving into attack formation. He just declared war on beings he knew nothing about, old for a creature he'd met 5 minutes ago. But as the hatchling looked up at him with those trusting golden eyes, Marcus knew he'd made the right choice. Whatever came next, he wasn't going to abandon something that needed his protection. Well, Kayla said dryly, this is going to be interesting. The first dragon ship opened fire on the station's shields, and Marcus Chung, salvage worker from Earth, found himself at the center of an interstellar incident that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of both humans and dragons. The station's shields flared as energy bolts hammered against them. Marcus held the dragon hatchling close, feeling its tiny body trembling not with fear, but with what seemed like anger. Shields down to 60%, Kayla reported, her fingers flying over the control panel. Marcus, we can't fight 3 dragon warships with a salvage station's defenses, I know. Marcus looked down at the hatchling, whose golden eyes were now glowing brighter. But I'm not giving him up to people who threw him away like garbage. The communication array crackled again. Human Caretaker. I am Commander Vexstar of the Crimson Wing clan. You have 1 minute to surrender the hatchling before we board your station. Marcus keyed the comm. Commander, before you start shooting, maybe you should explain why we found this little guy frozen in a failing stasis pod mixed in with scrap metal. There was a pause. The circumstances of the hatchling's departure are not your concern. The hell they're not. Marcus's voice hardened. Someone threw away a living being. In human culture, we call that attempted murder. Your species' primitive concepts of morality are apparently more advanced than yours, Marcus interrupted. The hatchling made an approving chirp. Commander Vexstar's voice turned dangerous. You dare lecture the dragon clans on morality? We have ruled space for millennia while your species was crawling in mud? And in all that time, did you learn how to take care of your own children? The silence stretched so long that Marcus wondered if the channel had been cut. When Vexstar spoke again, his voice carried a note of surprise. The hatchling responds to you. Marcus looked down. The little dragon was indeed more alert, its scales brightening as it nuzzled against his chest. Yeah, he seems to like me. Impossible. Dragons only bond with other dragons. It is our most sacred law. Well, maybe your sacred law needs updating. Marcus stood up, still cradling the hatchling. Look, Commander, I don't want a war. But I'm not handing over a child to people who abandoned it. If you want him back, prove to me you'll treat him right. Another long pause. You challenge the Crimson Wing clan? If that's what it takes. Kayla shot him a look that clearly said, have you lost your mind? But Marcus pressed on. What would it take to prove I'm worthy of caring for him? Human. Vexstar's voice carried a mixture of incredulity and something that might have been respect. You truly do not know what you ask. Then educate me. The dragon ships stopped firing. Through the viewports, Marcus could see them repositioning into what looked like a ceremonial formation. Very well, Vexstar said slowly. By ancient law, any being who claims kinship with a dragon may be tested. The trial of worthiness consists of 3 challenges: courage, wisdom, and heart. Few dragons survive it. No alien has ever attempted it. What happens if I fail? Death for you and the hatchling. Marcus felt the little dragon press closer against him, making soft sounds of concern. He looked at Kayla, who shook her head frantically. Marcus, don't do this. We can contact Earth Command, get a fleet here, and start a war that could kill billions. Marcus stroked the hatchling's scales. No, this is my choice. He keyed the come again. I accept your trial, Commander. The largest dragon ship moved closer to the station. Prepare for boarding. The trial begins immediately. As the dragons docked with the station, Marcus wondered what he'd gotten himself into. But the hatchling looked up at him with such trust that his doubts evaporated. Whatever these trials involved, he'd face them. The airlock opened with a hiss, and Marcus got his first look at adult dragons. They were magnificent and terrifying, 3 meters tall, covered in scales that seemed to shift colors in the light, with wings that barely fit through the station's corridors. Their eyes held an intelligence that was clearly ancient and alien. Commander Vextar was the largest, his scales a deep crimson that matched his clan's name. He studied Marcus with an expression that mixed curiosity with contempt. "You are smaller than expected for one who speaks so boldly," the commander said. "Size isn't everything," Marcus replied. The hatchling chirped agreement, causing several dragons to exchange startled looks. "The hatchling is indeed bonded to you," Vextar admitted. "This complicates matters. Dragons do not bond with inferior species. Maybe we're not as inferior as you think?" Vextar approached slowly, his massive form dwarfing the human. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you are simply ignorant of the forces you meddle with." He leaned down, bringing his great head level with Marcus's. "That hatchling is no ordinary dragon. He is Kithara, heir to the Azure Throne, last prince of the most ancient bloodline." Marcus looked down at the little dragon Kithara, who was watching the exchange with bright, intelligent eyes. If he's so important, why was he thrown away like trash? Because his birth caused the War of Scales. 5 clans have died fighting over who would raise the prince. The Crimson Wing clan was tasked with his protection. But when our enemies discovered his location, Vextar's voice trailed off. "You hid him in a stasis pod and sent him away." "To save his life, yes. The pod was programmed to drift in deep space until the war ended. It was never meant to be found by salvagers." Marcus felt a chill. "How long has he been frozen?" 200 years. The weight of that revelation settled on Marcus's shoulders. This wasn't just any dragon child, this was royalty, a prince whose very existence had caused centuries of war. "The trial's human," Vextar said, straightening to his full height. "Do you still wish to prove your worthiness to guard Prince Kithara?" Marcus looked around at the assembled dragons, then down at the trusting face of the hatchling. Every instinct told him he was in over his head. These were beings who measured their lives in millennia, who commanded technology that could crack planets. But the little prince made a soft sound and nuzzled his hand. And Marcus's resolve hardened. "I'm ready." Vextar nodded slowly. "Then let the trial of worthiness begin. Succeed, and you will be named guardian of the prince. Fail." He left the threat unspoken as the dragons began chanting in their ancient language. Marcus realized he was about to attempt something that would either make him the most honored human in galactic history, or get him killed in ways he couldn't even imagine. The dragons transported Marcus to their lead ship, where ancient chambers had been prepared for the trials. Prince Kithara remained pressed against Marcus's chest, his golden eyes reflecting the strange, glowing symbols that covered the walls. "Commander." Vextar led them through corridors that seemed to pulse with living energy. "The trials were designed by the first dragon emperor 10,000 years ago," he explained. "They test the 3 fundamental qualities required to guard dragon royalty. Has anyone ever failed and survived?" "No," Marcus swallowed hard but kept walking. The corridor opened into a vast chamber where dozens of dragons had gathered. Their scales created a rainbow of colors: emerald green, sapphire blue, obsidian black, and many shades Marcus had no names for. At the center of the chamber stood an ornate platform surrounded by 3 archways, each glowing with different colored energy. The dragons formed a circle around the platform, their voices rising in a low, harmonious chant that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. "The first trial," Vextar announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Courage in the face of impossible odds." The leftmost archway flared to life, revealing what looked like a swirling vortex of stars. "Beyond that portal lies the nightmare realm, where your deepest fears take physical form. You must reach the center and claim the flame of bravery." Prince Kithara cannot accompany you, he must remain here. Marcus looked down at the little dragon, who made distressed chirping sounds. It's okay, little prince. I'll be back. He handed Kithara to Kayla, who had been brought along as his witness. The hatchling's protests grew louder, but Marcus steeled himself and approached the portal. Remember, human, Vexstar called out. In the nightmare realm, your fears have teeth? Marcus stepped through the archway and immediately felt the world twist around him. He found himself standing in the salvage station's cargo bay, but everything was wrong. The lights flickered with an eerie red glow, and the air carried the smell of burnt metal and something else, something organic and foul. A sound made him turn. Kayla stood near the workstation, but her face was twisted with disappointment. You failed me, Marcus. You always fail everyone you try to help. You're not real, Marcus said firmly, though his voice shook slightly. Aren't I? The fake Kayla's form began to shift and grow. Remember the Morrison family? You couldn't save their daughter from the equipment malfunction. Remember Captain Torres? Your equipment failure cost him his life. Marcus closed his eyes, forcing himself to remember the truth. Yes, there had been accidents. Yes, people had died despite his efforts. But he'd also saved lives, prevented disasters, made differences that mattered. I'm not perfect, he said aloud. But I don't give up. The fake Kayla shrieked and dissolved into shadows. But more shapes emerged from the darkness. Every person Marcus had ever failed to help. Every mistake he'd ever made given horrible form. He pressed forward through the chamber, each step requiring tremendous effort. The fears whispered in his ears, telling him he was weak, worthless. A failure who would only bring harm to Prince Kythara. The chamber center. A small flame burned on a pedestal blue-white fire that seemed to push back the surrounding darkness. As Marcus reached for it, the largest shadow materialized between him and the flame. It was himself, or rather, a version of himself consumed by doubt and self-hatred. You think you can protect a dragon, Prince? The shadow Marcus sneered. You're nobody special. Just a salvage worker who got lucky. Maybe, Marcus replied, surprising the shadow. But that doesn't mean I won't try. He lunged forward, passing through the shadow version of himself. His hand closed around the flame, and immediately the nightmare realm began to crumble. The fears and doubts were still there, but they no longer controlled him. Marcus found himself back in the trial chamber, holding a small crystal that pulsed with the same blue-white light. The dragons around him were making sounds that might have been approval. Prince Kithara broke free from Kayla's arms and scampered over to Marcus, climbing up his leg to perch on his shoulder. The little dragon nuzzled his neck, purring with relief. Commander Vexstar stepped forward, his expression unreadable. You did not conquer your fears, human. You acknowledged them and continued anyway. This is ... expected. Courage isn't about not being afraid, Marcus said, still catching his breath. It's about doing what's right despite the fear. An interesting philosophy. Vexstar gestured to the second archway, which was beginning to glow with golden light. The second trial awaits. The trial of wisdom. The golden portal showed not another realm, but what appeared to be a vast library stretching beyond the limits of sight. Scrolls, books, and data crystals filled shelves that rose impossibly high, tended by strange floating mechanisms. The archive of all knowledge, Vexstar explained. Within its depths lies the answer to a riddle that has puzzled the dragon clans for centuries. You have 1 hour to find the solution, and you may ask only 3 questions of the archive's guardian. Marcus studied the portal. Unlike the courage trial, this one seemed to require more than determination. What's the riddle? Vexstar's eyes gleamed. How can enemies become family? The question seemed simple, but Marcus sensed layers of meaning beneath it. He looked at Prince Kithara, who was watching him with those intelligent golden eyes. Can Kithara come with me this time? The prince may accompany you, yes? Marcus nodded and stepped through the portal with the little dragon perched on his shoulder. The archive was even more overwhelming in person, not just books, but crystallized memories, floating holographic displays, and things that might have been living thoughts taking physical form. A figure materialized before them, tall, graceful, with features that seemed to shift between different species. I am the Guardian. You may ask 3 questions, and I will provide 3 answers. Choose wisely. Marcus walked deeper into the archive, thinking. The riddle wasn't just about general enemies and family. It was specific to the dragon clans, the war that had been fought over Prince Cathara for 2 centuries. The clans that had died, the hatred that had built up over time. Prince Cathara chirped softly and pointed with one small claw at a section of the archive devoted to dragon genealogy. Marcus followed the gesture and found himself looking at family trees that went back millennia. My first question, Marcus said to the Guardian. What caused the original split between the dragon clans? A misunderstanding over heritage? The Guardian replied. 5 clans believed themselves to be the rightful heirs to the Azure throne when Prince Cathara was born. Each had valid claims based on different interpretations of ancient law. Marcus studied the genealogical charts more carefully. Prince Cathara was watching too, his small head tilting as if he recognized some of the names. My second question, are all 5 clans actually related to Prince Cathara? Yes, each clan descends from a different child of the last Azure Emperor. Prince Cathara carries the genetic markers of all 5 bloodlines. Marcus felt the pieces clicking together. My third question, what would happen if Prince Cathara claimed all 5 clans as his rightful family? The Guardian smiled, the first emotion Marcus had seen from the being. Then enemies would indeed become family, and the War of Scales would have no purpose. Prince Cathara chirped excitedly and nuzzled Marcus's cheek. The little dragon had understood before Marcus he wasn't the heir of one clan over others. He was the heir of all clans, the one who could unite them. When they returned to the trial chamber, Marcus carried both the flame of courage and the crystal of wisdom. But more importantly, he carried the answer that could end a war that had raged for centuries. The riddle's answer, Marcus announced to the assembled dragons, is that Prince Cathara doesn't belong to any single clan. He belongs to all of them. The war was fought because everyone was right. The chamber erupted in startled roars and rapid conversation in the dragon language. Commander Vexstar stared at Marcus with something approaching awe. If this is true, he began. Then, the last trial will determine whether you're worthy to guide our prince in reuniting the clans, finished another voice. All eyes turned to the third portal, which was beginning to glow with a soft, warm light that somehow reminded Marcus of home. The third portal glowed with gentle warmth, so different from the chaotic energy of the nightmare realm or the vast complexity of the archive. This light felt familiar somehow, like sunset through kitchen windows or the glow of a campfire on a cold night. The final trial? Commander Vexstar announced, his voice softer now. The trial of heart. Prince Cathara had grown quiet on Marcus's shoulder, his golden eyes reflecting the portal's light with what almost looked like longing. The little dragon made a soft sound, not quite a chirp, more like a sigh. What's beyond this one? Marcus asked. Memory, replied an ancient dragon whose scales had faded to silver with age. The prince's memories, locked away when he was placed in stasis. You must help him remember what was taken from him, his family, his heritage, his purpose. But beware, human. With memory comes pain. The prince will remember not just love, but loss. Marcus looked down at Cathara, understanding flooding through him. He doesn't remember anything before the stasis, does he? Nothing? The process preserved his life but wiped his mind clean. In helping him remember, you may lose the innocent hatchling you've come to care for. He may become distant, formal, royal. Are you prepared for that sacrifice? The question hit Marcus harder than expected. The little dragon who had curled up in his arms, who chirped with joy at simple affection, who trusted him completely that innocent wonder might disappear forever. But as he looked at Cathara, Marcus saw something in those golden eyes. A sadness the little dragon himself didn't understand, a sense of incompleteness that went beyond not knowing where he came from. It's not my choice, Marcus said finally. It's his. He deserves to know who he is, even if it hurts. Prince Cathara looked up at him and made a soft sound of agreement. Together they stepped through the portal, They emerged in what appeared to be a vast nursery, but one designed for dragons. The ceiling soared impossibly high, painted with constellations that moved slowly across the artificial sky. Perches and platforms were built into the walls at various heights, and soft nests were arranged throughout the space, but the nursery was empty and covered in dust, as if it had been abandoned long ago. Prince Kithara slid down from Marcus's shoulder and walked slowly across the floor, his small claws clicking on the polished stone. He stopped at one particular nest larger than the others and lined with what might once have been silk cushions. The hatchling's eyes began to glow brighter, and suddenly the nursery filled with ghostly images. Marcus watched as memories played out like holograms around them. A massive dragon with scales like sapphires bent down to nuzzle a much smaller version of Prince Kithara. The little dragon in the memory chirped happily and tried to climb onto the larger dragon's back. "Papa!" the memory Kithara said in a voice like tinkling bells. "Fly with me." "Not yet, little prince," the large dragon replied with infinite patience. "Your wings must grow stronger first." Marcus felt his throat tighten. The blue dragon had to be Kithara's father, the previous Azure Emperor. The resemblance was unmistakable, despite the difference in size and age. More memories swirled around them. Kithara learning to speak in the ancient dragon tongue, practicing small bursts of flame, playing with mechanical toys that flew around the nursery like tiny spacecraft. And always the patient presence of dragons who clearly adored him, but then the memories grew darker. Adult dragons arguing in heated voices while young Kithara hid behind his father's leg. The sound of ships approaching. The panic in his father's eyes as he realized enemies had found their stronghold. "You must go, my son," the emperor said, pressing something small and glowing into the young prince's claws. "This will keep you safe until I can come for you." "But Papa, I don't want to leave." "I know, but sometimes we must be brave even when we're afraid." The present-day Kithara was trembling as the memories flooded back. Marcus knelt beside him, offering a comforting hand. The little dragon leaned against him. Drawing strength from the contact, the final memory was the hardest, being placed in the stasis pod while his father fought desperately against attackers in the background. Young Kithara's terrified cries as the pod sealed and consciousness faded when the last memory ended. The nursery returned to its dusty, abandoned state. Prince Kithara sat quietly for a long moment, then looked up at Marcus with eyes that held ancient sadness alongside their former innocence. "I remember," he said, and his voice was different now, still young, but carrying the weight of royal heritage. "My father, is he—" Marcus wished he had better news. "I don't know, little prince. Commander Vexstar would have more information." Kithara nodded solemnly, then did something that surprised Marcus. Instead of becoming distant or formal, the young dragon pressed closer against him. "Thank you," Kithara said quietly, "for helping me remember. It hurts, but I needed to know." "You don't have to face it alone," Marcus promised. "Whatever happens next, I'm here if you want me to be." The portal back to the trial chamber opened and they walked through together. The assembled dragons watched with intense curiosity as Prince Kithara approached Commander Vexstar. "Uncle Vex," Kithara said, using a familiar form of address that made the commander's eyes widen. "Please tell me about Papa." Vexstar's composure cracked slightly. "Your father, Emperor Zarath, fought bravely to the end, young prince. He held off 5 clan armies long enough for your pod to escape. He died believing he had saved you." Kithara absorbed this news with the stoicism of someone far older than his apparent age. "And the clans that killed him, they're the same ones fighting over me?" "Yes, my prince." Kithara turned to address the entire assembly, his young voice carrying surprising authority. "Then they will answer to me. All of them. Because I am not just heir to the Azure throne, I am heir to all the clans, and it's time they remembered their family." A stunned silence filled the chamber. Then, slowly, Commander Vexstar went to one knee. "What are your orders, your highness?" Prince Kithara looked up at Marcus, then back at the assembled dragons. "My guardian and I will visit each clan. They will see that I live, that the war was pointless, and that I choose forgiveness over vengeance. Any who refuse. The young dragon's eyes flashed with inner fire. Any who refuse will learn why the Azure bloodline has ruled for 10,000 years. Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. The innocent hatchling was still there, but now tempered with the wisdom and responsibility of his heritage. And if they don't listen to a child? Challenged one of the dragons. Prince Kithara smiled, an expression that managed to be both young and terrifyingly regal. Then they'll listen to the human who passed the trials of worthiness for my sake. Won't they, Guardian Marcus? Marcus looked around at the dragons, all of whom were now watching him with a mixture of respect and wariness. He thought about the salvage station, his quiet life, the simple problems he'd faced before this day. Then he looked at Prince Kithara, brilliant, brave, and carrying the weight of ending a centuries-old war. Absolutely. Your Highness, Marcus said. When do we start? The dragon assembly erupted in roars of approval, and Marcus Chun realized his life had just become far more complicated than he'd ever imagined. But as Prince Kithara climbed back onto his shoulder, tail curling around his neck in affection, Marcus knew he wouldn't change a thing. The trials were complete. Now the real work began. The journey to the first clan stronghold took 3 days through hyperspace aboard the Crimson Wing flagship. Marcus spent most of that time learning about dragon culture from Prince Kithara, who seemed to remember more details each day as his mind fully awakened from the long stasis. The Emerald Claw clog will be the most difficult, Kithara explained as they studied star charts in the ship's strategy room. Despite his small size, the other dragons now addressed him with formal respect, though they still looked uncertainly at Marcus. Why the Emerald Claws specifically? Marcus asked. They were Papa's greatest rivals before he became emperor. My grandmother was from their clan, which gives them a legitimate claim to the throne. But their current leader, Matriarch Silthara, believes she should have been chosen as empress instead of Papa. Commander Vexstar entered the strategy room, his massive form filling the doorway. Your Highness, we're receiving transmissions from the Emerald Claw territory. They know we're coming. What kind of transmissions? Threats, mostly. They're demanding we turn around and deliver you to them for proper royal education? They don't believe a human could possibly serve as your guardian. Prince Kithara's scales darkened with annoyance. They'll learn differently. Marcus proved himself in the trials. That should be enough for any dragon. With respect, Your Highness, Vexstar said carefully, the Emerald Claws weren't present for the trials. They'll want their own proof of the human's worthiness. Marcus felt a familiar knot in his stomach. What kind of proof? Knowing Silthara, probably combat. She's old-fashioned that way. Great, Marcus muttered. Fighting a dragon. That should go well. Kithara looked up at him with concern. You don't have to fight, Marcus. I can command them to accept you. No, little prince. If I'm going to be your guardian, I need to earn respect, not just demand it. Marcus managed a smile. Besides, I've gotten pretty good at doing impossible things lately. The Emerald Claw stronghold was built into an asteroid field, with massive dragon ships carved directly from the floating rocks. Green lights marked docking bays and defensive positions, creating a constellation that pulsed like a giant heartbeat dot as their ship approached. Marcus could see dozens of Emerald Claw dragons perched on the asteroids, their scales glinting in the reflected starlight. They were beautiful and terrifying. Each one easily 3 times larger than Prince Kithara would be when fully grown. The docking bay they were assigned to was clearly meant to intimidate. Ancient carvings covered the walls, depicting dragons in various poses of dominance over other species. Marcus noticed that humans didn't appear in any of the artwork, probably because dragons hadn't considered them worth depicting. Matriarch Silthara waited for them in the center of the bay, surrounded by her honor guard. She was magnificent scales like polished emeralds, wings that cast shadows across half the chamber, and eyes that held the accumulated wisdom and pride of centuries. So, she said as they disembarked, her voice like distant thunder, the lost prince returns, carried like cargo by a pet human. Prince Cathara slid down from Marcus's shoulder and drew himself up to his full height, which was still barely tall enough to reach Silthara's ankle. Matriarch Silthara, I present Guardian Marcus Chun, who proved his worthiness in the ancient trials. Trials conducted by the Crimson Wing clan, Silthara replied dismissively. We do not recognize their authority in this matter. Then what would it take for you to recognize mine? Marcus asked, stepping forward. The matriarch's enormous head swung toward him, and Marcus felt the full weight of her attention. It was like standing under a mountain that might decide to fall on him at any moment. Bold words from such a small creature? Very well, human. We have our own test. Survive 1 minute in single combat against Champion Nexmore, and we will acknowledge your right to guard the prince. A dragon even larger than Silthara stepped forward from the honor guard. His scales were so dark green they were almost black, and scars covered his hide like trophies. He looked like he could swat Marcus like an annoying insect. Matriarch, Prince Cathara protested. This is hardly fair. The terms are set, Silthara declared. Does the human accept? Marcus looked up at Champion Nexmore, who was flexing claws that could probably cut through starship hull plating. Every rational thought in his head screamed that this was suicide. But then he thought about the trials he'd already passed, about the trust in Prince Cathara's golden eyes, about the centuries of war that could end if he could just prove himself to these proud beings. I accept, Marcus said. But I choose the arena. Silthara's eyes narrowed. Explain. Single combat doesn't have to mean brute force. If we're testing worthiness to guard the prince, shouldn't we test wisdom, strategy, and adaptability? Not just who can hit harder? You propose what exactly? Marcus gestured toward the hangar bay's zero-gravity training area, where young dragons practiced flight maneuvers. 3-dimensional combat in zero gravity. No weapons except what we can improvise from the environment. First one to immobilize their opponent wins. Champion Nexmore laughed, sound like an avalanche. The little human thinks he can outfly a dragon? This should be amusing. Acceptable, Silthara declared. Clear the training area. As the dragons prepared the arena, Prince Cathara pulled Marcus aside. Are you insane? The young dragon whispered. Nexmore has been fighting in zero gravity for 3 centuries. Maybe, Marcus admitted. But he's also used to fighting opponents who think like dragons. I'm hoping my human perspective gives me an edge. What edge? He outweighs you by a factor of 50. Marcus grinned. Exactly. Newton's third law for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. In zero gravity, mass can be a disadvantage if you know how to use it. The arena was a vast sphere lined with handholds, obstacles, and floating debris that could be used as improvised weapons or shields. Marcus and Champion Nexmore took positions on opposite sides, while the assembled dragons perched around the sphere's exterior to watch. Begin! Matriarch Silthara roared. Champion Nexmore immediately launched himself across the arena, wings spread wide, claws extended. His massive form moved with surprising grace through the zero gravity. But Marcus was already in motion. Instead of trying to dodge or fight directly, Marcus grabbed a piece of floating debris and hurled it at Nexmore's center of mass. The dragon easily swatted it aside, but the impact sent him spinning slightly off course. Marcus used that moment to reach one of the arena's structural supports, changing direction in a way that would have been impossible in gravity. Nexmore roared in frustration and pushed off the arena wall to pursue. For the next 40 seconds, Marcus led the dragon champion on a merry chase through the 3-dimensional maze. He used every physics principle he'd learned in salvage work: momentum, angular velocity, conservation of energy. When Nexmore charged, Marcus redirected the dragon's own force against him. When the champion tried to corner him, Marcus found escape routes the larger being couldn't follow. With 10 seconds left, Marcus made his move. He grabbed a particularly large piece of debris and positioned himself directly in Nexmore's path. When the dragon champion lunged for what looked like an easy kill, Marcus released the debris and used it as a springboard, launching himself in an unexpected direction while simultaneously wrapping a cargo tether around Nexmore's wing. The dragon's momentum carried him into the arena wall, and the tether tangled around several structural supports. By the time Vexmore realized what had happened, he was thoroughly entangled and Marcus was floating safely out of reach. Time. Silthara called. The arena fell silent except for Vexmore's struggles with the tether. Marcus floated in place, breathing hard but victorious. Impossible, one of the dragons whispered. He used Vexmore's own strength against him. Another observed. Matriarch Silthara studied Marcus with new interest. Champion, are you unharmed? Embarrassed, but unharmed, Vexmore admitted as other dragons helped free him. He looked at Marcus with something approaching respect. The human fights like no opponent I've faced. He thinks ... differently. Indeed. Silthara turned her attention to Prince Kithara. Your guardian has proven he can protect you through wit rather than strength. The Emerald Claw clan acknowledges his worthiness. Prince Kithara beamed with pride. I told you Marcus was special. But Silthara wasn't finished. However, before we can discuss reunification of the clans, there is something you must know, young prince. Your father's death. It was not quite as we believed. The celebration died in Prince Kithara's throat. What do you mean? Emperor Zareth lives, Silthara said quietly. But he is imprisoned by the Ironscale clan, tortured for the location of your stasis pod. He has endured 2 centuries of agony rather than reveal where hidden. The arena erupted in shocked roars, but Marcus only had eyes for Prince Kithara. The young dragon's scales had gone pale, and his golden eyes filled with a mixture of hope and terrible determination. Where? Kithara asked, his voice deadly quiet. The Ironscale fortress in the Hellspine Nebula. But young prince, it is the most heavily defended. We're going. Kithara interrupted, and for the first time since Marcus had known him, the dragon sounded truly royal. Guardian Marcus, how do you feel about rescuing an emperor? The combined fleet of Crimson Wing and Emerald Claw ships made an impressive sight as they approached the Hellspine Nebula. Marcus stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching Prince Kithara coordinate the battle plans with military precision that seemed impossible for someone who looked like a child. The Ironscale fortress is built inside a collapsed star, Kithara explained to the assembled commanders. The gravitational distortions make it nearly impossible to approach directly, and the nebula's radiation interferes with most sensors. Matriarch Silthara studied the tactical displays with grim concentration. We've tried to assault this fortress for decades. Thousands of dragons have died against its defenses. That's because you've always tried direct assault, Marcus observed. What if we don't fight the defenses at all? Commander Vexstar looked skeptical. The fortress has no weaknesses, Guardian Marcus. The Ironscale clan has had 2 centuries to perfect it. Every fortress has weaknesses, Marcus replied. They just might not be the ones you expect. Prince Kithara's eyes lit up with understanding. You have a plan. I have the beginning of one. Tell me about the fortress's power source. Gravitational taps from the collapsed star, Silthara answered. Virtually unlimited energy and waste heat disposal. Massive radiator arrays extending into the nebula. She paused, beginning to see where Marcus was heading. But even if you could damage them, the fortress could operate for days on backup power. I don't want to damage them. I want to use them. Marcus turned to the assembled dragons. How many of you can generate electromagnetic pulses? All of us, to some degree, Vexstar replied. But the fortress is shielded against electromagnetic attacks. Not from the inside? Prince Kithara was practically vibrating with excitement. Marcus, that's brilliant. But how do we get inside? Marcus smiled. We don't break in. We get invited. The plan was audacious, risky, and relied heavily on dragon psychology. Marcus was counting on the Ironscale clan's arrogance and their desire to capture Prince Kithara alive. 3 hours later, a small, apparently damaged shuttle emerged from the fleet and limped toward the fortress. Its distress beacon broadcast a simple message. Prince Kithara aboard. Escort destroyed. Requesting sanctuary. Marcus piloted the shuttle while Prince Kithara lay on a medical stretcher, pretending to be unconscious. Hidden throughout the shuttle were the smallest dragons from both clans, compressed into storage compartments that would hopefully fool the fortress's sensors. Iron Scale Command. This is Medical Shuttle Omega requesting immediate docking clearance, Marcus transmitted. The prince is critically injured and needs medical attention. The response came quickly. Shuttle Omega, you are cleared for emergency docking. Prepare for immediate boarding and inspection. Acknowledged, Marcus replied, then switched to internal comm. Everyone ready? Once we're inside, we'll have maybe 10 minutes before they realize this is a trick. Prince Kithara opened one golden eye. Are you nervous, Guardian? Terrified, Marcus admitted. But we're going to save your father anyway. The shuttle bay that received them was massive, designed to accommodate dragons in flight. Marcus could see dozens of iron scale guards, positioned around the Baydark-scaled beings with red markings that looked like cooling lava. They were impressive and intimidating, but Marcus noticed they were positioned to prevent escape, not to repel an invasion from within. As soon as the shuttle touched down, iron-scale dragons surrounded it. The bay doors sealed with a finality that made Marcus's stomach clench. Exit the craft with your hands visible, commanded what was obviously the guard captain. His voice amplified through the bay's communication system. The prince will be transferred to our medical facility immediately. Marcus opened the shuttle's rear hatch and stepped out, his hands raised. Behind him, several iron-scale medics approached the stretcher where Prince Kithara lay motionless. I need to stay with him, Marcus said. He bonded with me during the crisis. Separation could cause psychological trauma. The guard captain laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. The famous human guardian. Lord Kexthal is eager to meet you. You'll both be our guests for a very long time. I was hoping you'd say that, Marcus replied. His words. Prince Kithara's eyes snapped open, blazing with golden fire. Simultaneously, dragons began emerging from every conceivable hiding place in the shuttle storage compartments. Maintenance panels. Even the engine housings. The iron scale guards had perhaps 3 seconds to register what was happening before the bay erupted in chaos. Dragons filled the air in a whirling storm of scales and claws, but these weren't random attacks. Every move was coordinated, designed to disable rather than kill. The detention levels. Prince Kithara called out as he leaped from the stretcher. Papa will be in the maximum security cells. Marcus followed the young dragon through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate. Everything was black iron and red crystal, with flowing designs that suggested both power and cruelty. Emergency alarms were already sounding, and iron-scale reinforcements would arrive soon. They found the detention levels 3 floors down, behind doors that would have stopped conventional weapons but yielded to the focused flame of angry dragons. The cells beyond were a nightmare, row after row of crystalline cages designed to contain beings of immense power. Papa! Prince Kithara's voice echoed through the chamber, desperate and hopeful. Kithara? The response came from the deepest cell, weak but unmistakably royal. My son, you've grown. Emperor Zarath was barely recognizable. 2 centuries of imprisonment had taken their toll. His once magnificent scales were dull and scarred, his powerful frame reduced by malnutrition and torture. But his eyes still held the intelligence and nobility that had made him a legendary ruler. Stand back, Your Majesty, Marcus called as he worked on the cell's locking mechanism. We're getting you out of here. The human guardian, Zarath observed, his voice gaining strength. I heard whispers. That my son had bonded with an alien. I thought it was enemy propaganda. Papa, Marcus passed the trials of worthiness, Prince Kithara explained as the cell door finally opened. He's family now. Emperor Zarath stepped out of his prison with dignity intact despite his condition. When he looked at Marcus, there was evaluation in his gaze, but also gratitude. Any being willing to risk their life for my son has my eternal respect, he said formally. But we must leave this place quickly. Lord Kexthal is standing right behind you? Finished a new voice. They spun to see the lord of the Ironscale clan emerging from the shadows. He was massive even by dragon standards, his dark scales seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Most disturbing were his eyes, not the usual brilliant colors of dragon irises, but a flat black that seemed to hold no life at all. The lost prince, the fallen emperor, and the pet human? All delivered to my doorstep, Kexthal continued, his voice like distant thunder. How remarkably convenient. Lord Kexthal, Prince Cathara said, straightening to his full height despite barely reaching the other dragon's knee. I offer you the same choice I've given the other clans. Join me in ending this war, and I'll overlook your crimes against my family. Kexthal laughed, a sound devoid of humor. You think yourself in a position to offer terms, Hatchling? You're trapped in my fortress with nowhere to run, are we? Marcus asked mildly. At that moment, the fortress shuddered as something impacted its outer hull. Emergency lights began flashing, and the temperature in the detention level started to rise noticeably. What? Kexthal began. While we were having this touching reunion, Marcus explained. My friends outside have been using their electromagnetic pulses to overload your radiator arrays. Your fortress is now generating more heat than it can dissipate. In about 5 minutes, the internal temperature will reach levels that even dragons find uncomfortable. The fortress shuddered again, more violently this time. You're bluffing, Kexthal snarled, but uncertainty crept into his voice. The cooling systems have multiple redundancies. They did, Prince Cathara confirmed. But you built this fortress to keep people out, not to keep heat in. Every dragon outside is now channeling their energy into your cooling systems through the radiator arrays. Physics is remarkably democratic. It doesn't care how powerful you think you are. The temperature continued to climb. Even Marcus, with his lower heat tolerance, could feel it becoming uncomfortable. For dragons who had evolved in extreme environments, the fact that they were noticing the heat meant it was becoming genuinely dangerous. Surrender now, Emperor Zarath said, his voice regaining its imperial authority, and I'll ensure your trial is fair. Continue this madness and you'll cook in your own fortress. Lord Kexthal looked around desperately, but his troops were already beginning to show signs of distress from the heat. The Ironscale clan's greatest strength, their fortress, had become their greatest weakness. This is impossible, he muttered. No one has ever... That's the problem with thinking you're superior to everyone else, Marcus interrupted. You stop learning from them. The proud lord of the Ironscale clan stood in his overheating fortress, faced with the choice between surrender and death. As sweat began to bead on his dark scales and his guards looked to him with increasing desperation, Marcus could see the exact moment when Kexthal's certainty finally cracked. I yield, he said quietly. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Unity Station, watching the most extraordinary sight in galactic history unfold before him. Representatives from all 5 dragon clans had gathered in the same space for the first time in 3 centuries. Their ships arranged in a ceremonial formation that spoke of peace rather than war. Prince Cathara, now considerably larger and bearing the formal title of Crown Prince, stood beside him. No longer the tiny hatchling Marcus had found in the salvage yard. The young dragon had grown both physically and in confidence, but he still had the habit of perching on Marcus's shoulder when he was thinking. Nervous? Marcus asked as they watched the final clan delegation arrive. Terrified, Cathara admitted, echoing Marcus's words from months earlier. What if they change their minds? What if Papa's not strong enough for the ceremony? What if, Hey, Marcus interrupted gently. Remember what you told me about courage? Kithara's golden eyes brightened with a smile. It's not about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right despite the fear. Exactly. And what we're doing today is right. Below them, Emperor Zarath was greeting the clan leaders with a mixture of imperial dignity and genuine warmth. His recovery had been remarkable. Proper nutrition and medical care had restored much of his former magnificence, though he would always carry the scars of his imprisonment. More importantly, his experience had given him a wisdom and compassion that made him an even greater leader than before. Guardian Marcus, came a familiar voice. Kayla Rodriguez approached, wearing the formal uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. Ready for your big moment? Marcus looked down at himself. resplendent in clothes that had been designed specifically for this occasion. The outfit managed to blend human formal wear with dragon ceremonial elements in a way that somehow worked, despite being completely unprecedented. I still can't believe they're making me an honorary clan member, he said. Honorary? Prince Kithara looked offended. Marcus, you're not honorary anything. You're family. The clan records have been updated to reflect your full adoption into the Azure bloodline, which makes you technically a dragon prince, Kayla added with obvious amusement. Prince Marcus of the clan Azure has a nice ring to it. Before Marcus could protest that he was perfectly happy being human, Emperor Zareth's voice echoed through the station's communication system. Representatives of the dragon clans, honored guests, citizens of the galaxy, the Emperor began, his voice carrying the authority of millennia. Today we gather not to celebrate the end of war, but the beginning of understanding. The ceremony took place in Unity Station's central chamber, a vast space designed to accommodate dragons in flight while still being comfortable for smaller species. Thousands of beings filled the chamber, dragons, humans, and representatives from dozens of other civilizations who had come to witness this historic moment. Marcus found himself standing in a place of honor beside the imperial family, still somewhat amazed by the path that had brought him here. Prince Kithara had refused to participate in any ceremony that didn't formally recognize Marcus's role in their reunion. The War of Scales began with misunderstanding, Emperor Zareth continued. 5 clans, each believing themselves the rightful heirs to the Azure throne, fought for centuries over a question that had a simple answer: we are all rightful heirs. Prince Kithara carries the bloodlines of every clan, making him not the ruler of one over others, but the unifier of all. Murmurs of approval rippled through the assembly. The clan leaders, Matriarch Siltara of the Emerald Claws, Lord Kexthal of the Iron Scales, now bearing the marks of his submission, Commander Vexstar representing the Crimson Wings, and the leaders of the Silver Storm and Golden Talon clans all stood in positions of honor around the imperial dais. But, the Emperor continued, unification cannot be achieved through royal decree alone. It requires understanding, compromise, and wisdom. These qualities my son learned not from ancient dragon traditions, but from a human salvage worker who saw a child in need and chose compassion over caution. All eyes turned to Marcus, who felt his face burning with embarrassment. This was supposed to be Prince Kithara's moment. Not his, Guardian Marcus Chun, Emperor Zareth called formally. Approach the throne. Marcus walked forward, very aware that millions of beings across the galaxy were watching this moment through various broadcasts. When he reached the base of the dais, he began to kneel in the traditional manner, but Prince Kithara stopped him. None of that, the young dragon said firmly. Your family, remember? Instead, Marcus found himself standing beside the imperial throne as Prince Kithara addressed the assembly. The clans have agreed to my father's proposal, the prince announced, his young voice carrying surprising authority. The Azure Empire will be restructured as the United Dragon Clans, with each clan maintaining its autonomy while working together for common goals. My father will serve as the first elected High Emperor, but future leaders will be chosen by council vote. This was the most radical change of all. Dragons had ruled through hereditary monarchy for 10,000 years, but Prince Kithara had insisted on democratic reforms. The clan leaders had agreed, partly because they trusted his judgment and partly because they feared what might happen if they didn't. Furthermore, Prince Kithara continued, the United Dragon Clans formally recognizes humanity as our newest allied species, with full rights and privileges within our territories. Guardian Marcus will serve as the first human ambassador to our people. Marcus felt his mouth drop open. This was the first he was hearing about an ambassadorial appointment. Prince Kithara caught his expression and grinned mischievously. Did I forget to mention that part? The young dragon asked innocently. You absolutely did, Marcus replied, but he was smiling. Your Highness, I'm honored, but I'm not qualified to be an ambassador. I'm a salvage worker. You're the human who ended a 3-century war, Emperor Zareth pointed out. I think that qualifies you for whatever position you choose to hold. The ceremony continued with formal declarations, the signing of treaties, and the presentation of gifts between clans. But for Marcus, the most meaningful moment came when Prince Kithara was formally acknowledged as Crown Prince of the United Dragon Clans. The young dragon had grown so much from the frightened hatchling Marcus had found. But as he stood before thousands of beings accepting their loyalty and trust, he looked back at Marcus with an expression that clearly said, "I couldn't have done this without you," later. As the formal ceremonies wound down and the various delegations began to depart, Marcus found himself alone on the observation deck again. The stars looked the same as they had 6 months ago, but everything else in his life had changed beyond recognition. Regrets? Emperor Zarath asked, joining him at the viewing port. About which part? Becoming an ambassador without being consulted, getting adopted into a royal family, or accidentally starting an interstellar diplomatic revolution? About leaving your quiet life behind. Marcus considered the question seriously. His old life had been peaceful, predictable, safe. He'd known exactly what each day would bring and had been content with that certainty. "Ask me again in a few years," he said finally. "But right now, no regrets at all." "Good," the Emperor replied. "Because my son has some rather ambitious plans for expanding diplomatic relations with other species. Apparently he believes the dragon approach to first contact could use some human perspective. Meaning? Meaning, instead of establishing dominance through shows of strength, he wants to try your approach. Finding common ground, offering help, building trust through actions rather than demonstrations of power." Marcus laughed. "That's going to drive the traditionalists crazy." "Probably. But change is often uncomfortable for those who benefit from the old ways." Emperor Zarath paused, studying Marcus with ancient, wise eyes. "You saved more than just my son's life that day in the salvage yard? You saved our entire civilization from its own pride?" Before Marcus could respond to that overwhelming statement, Prince Kithara bounded onto the observation deck, his scales practically glowing with excitement. "Marcus!" "Papa, come quickly." The Centaurian delegation just arrived, and they brought musicians. "I've never heard music from another species before." The young dragon grabbed Marcus's hand and began pulling him toward the celebration, chattering excitedly about all the different beings he wanted to meet, and the questions he wanted to ask them as they headed back into the crowds. Emperor Zarath walking beside them with obvious contentment, Marcus reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. 6 months ago, he'd been Marcus Chung, salvage worker. Now he was Prince Marcus of Clan Azure, ambassador to humanity, and guardian to the most important young dragon in galactic history, but most importantly, he was family to beings who had become more precious to him than anything he'd ever known. "So," Prince Kithara said as they rejoined the celebration, "what do you think our next adventure should be? I've been getting messages from some very interesting species in the Outer Rim." Marcus looked at the young dragon, brilliant, compassionate, and absolutely determined to explore everything the galaxy had to offer, and felt his heart fill with a mixture of love and resignation. "Let me guess," he said. "They need our help with something impossible?"